It was the second week of August 2019, and New Orleans was doing that thing where the air feels like a wet towel someone pressed to your face and forgot about. I had been running nights out of the station off Tulane Avenue for about 3 years by then, and I could tell you which intersections lit up on a full moon and which ones lit up when the checks came in. That night, the checks had come in. We were parked behind a daiquiri place near Claiborne, engine idling, AC groaning. Marco was driving, big guy, ex-army, could sleep sitting up with his eyes half open, which he was doing. Kenny was in the back rechecking the O2, because Kenny always rechecked the O2 even when nobody asked. I was in the passenger seat eating a shrimp po' boy I already regretted. Call came in at 1:47. Male, mid-30s, possible assault, corner of St. Roch and North Roman. Caller was a woman who said she didn't want to give her name. She just saw somebody sitting on the curb and something was wrong with him. We got there in maybe 6 minutes. Streetlight was out on that block. The only real light was coming from a security bulb over a shuttered corner store. That ugly orange sodium color that makes everybody's skin look like they've been dead a while. He was sitting on the curb with his feet in the gutter. White guy, brown hair, no shirt, jeans, no shoes. Not bleeding out, not screaming, not drunk, just sitting, hands on his knees, head up, looking at us like we were the ones who had shown up late to something we agreed to earlier. Kenny got there first with the light. I remember him going, "Oh, what the hell?" The wounds were on his chest and his forearms and the tops of his thighs. There must have been 30 of them, and they were all the same. Little rectangles, maybe an inch long, a quarter inch wide, all cut to the same depth, all lined up in these neat rows like somebody had used a stencil. Not deep enough to kill him, not shallow enough to be a scratch, barely bleeding. Some of them looked like they had started to scab already, but that couldn't be right, because a couple of the ones on his forearm were still weeping. I've seen knife wounds. I've seen a guy who got dragged half a block behind a pickup on Airline. I have not seen that. Marco called it in and asked for PD to roll with us. Kenny knelt down and started the assessment. Gloves, light, questions. "Sir, can you tell me your name? Sir, do you know what day it is? Sir, who did this to you?" The guy answered the first two, said his name, said it was Tuesday, voice completely level like he was ordering a coffee. When Kenny got to the third question, he looked at Kenny for a second. Then he looked past Kenny at me. "Don't write it down," he said. "It's normal." That was it. That was the whole line. He said it once, and then he looked at his hands like the conversation was over. Kenny sort of laughed, because what else are you going to do, and said, "Sir, I have to write it down, that's the whole job." The guy didn't answer. We got him on the stretcher. He climbed on himself, didn't need help, which was maybe the part that stuck with me the most. Guys who have 30 holes in them do not sit up and swing their legs onto a stretcher like they're getting on a bar stool. I rode in the back with him. Kenny drove because Marco wanted to make the report call. On the way to University Medical, I did vitals. Pulse was 74. Blood pressure was fine. Pupils were fine. Skin was warm. He was, by every number I had, a healthy adult male, and he was covered in these little, tidy rectangles, like somebody had branded him. I asked him again, softly, if he wanted to tell me what happened. "Off the record," I said, which was a stupid thing to say because I don't have a record that isn't the record. But you say things. He looked at me. He had gray eyes. I remember thinking they looked tired but not scared. He said, "You're going to want to forget this part." I said, "What part?" He said, "All of it." Then he closed his eyes and didn't talk again the whole ride. We handed him off at UMC around 2:20. Signed him in as a John Doe because he wouldn't repeat his name for intake, even though he'd said it to Kenny on the street. The triage nurse, a woman named Patrice who I'd worked with 100 times, gave me a look over her clipboard when I described the wounds. Not a scared look, a tired look, like I was making her night harder for no reason. I wrote up the run sheet in the parking lot. Marco smoked. Kenny ate a granola bar and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Rectangles though. Who does rectangles?" We didn't have an answer. We caught 2 more calls that night, 1 overdose and 1 old lady who fell in her bathroom. And I mostly stopped thinking about the guy on the curb because that's what the job does to you. You have to stop thinking about them, or you can't do the next one. Next night was Wednesday. Same shift, same truck, same idling behind the same daiquiri place. Around midnight, we got sent to a pileup on the I-10 on-ramp near Elysian Fields. Nothing serious, fender bender, but somebody complained of neck pain, and we had to run him in for a check. We pulled into the UMC Bay a little after 1. There were 2 other rigs offloading ahead of us, so we sat. I looked over at the ambulance in front of us, one of the AMR units, and through their back window I could see the patient sitting up on their stretcher, waiting for a bed. White guy, brown hair, no shirt. I got out, told Marco I was going to grab a water from inside, and I walked past their rig. I didn't stare, I just glanced. It was him. Same face, same gray eyes, same little rectangles up his forearms. Some of the ones on his chest looked fresh. A couple of the ones on his ribs looked like they'd already scabbed over into these clean, pink lines, which was still impossible because it had been less than 24 hours. He saw me looking. He didn't react at first. Then he did the smallest thing. He put a finger up to his mouth, not dramatically, the way you shush a kid in a library. I kept walking. I got the water. I walked back and I got in the truck and I told Marco. Marco said, "You sure?" I said, "Marco, I put an IV in him last night." Kenny leaned forward from the back and said, "Same wounds?" I said, "Same wounds. Some of them healing, some of them new." Marco stared at the AMR rig for a long time. Then he said, "That's not our call." We finished our shift. I went home. I slept badly. I woke up at 11, made coffee, and drove back to UMC in street clothes because I could not let it go. I asked Patrice, who was pulling a double, if she remembered the John Doe from Tuesday night. She said she did. I asked if she'd seen him come back in last night through AMR. She frowned and pulled up the log on her computer. She scrolled. She scrolled again. She turned the screen a little so I could see it. There was no John Doe from Tuesday. There was no admit at 2:20 a.m. with those wounds. There was no AMR patient the next night matching that description either. My run sheet existed in our system. I had a copy of it in my bag, but on the hospital side, there was nothing. Not a wristband, not an intake, not a discharge. Like we had driven an empty stretcher into the bay and told everybody it was a person. I asked Patrice if maybe it got filed wrong. She said, kind of gently, "Honey, I signed him in myself. I remember doing it, and it isn't here." I sat in my car in the parking garage for a while. I filed a missing person report a week later, after I couldn't sleep for 6 nights in a row. NOPD took it because they take everything, but there wasn't much to work with. No last name, no address, a description that matched about 1,000 men in the city. I gave them the run sheet. The detective who called me back, a woman with a smoker's voice, said they'd flagged it and they'd let me know. She didn't sound like she thought they would. 2 years went by. I moved to days. Then back to nights, because the money on nights is better, and I'm not married, and I don't have kids, and it turns out I don't sleep right anymore anyway. Every couple of months I'd call the detective. Every couple of months she'd say the same thing, which was nothing. 3rd year, this past spring. I was at Lakeside Mall on a Saturday because my sister was in town and she wanted to look at a dress. We were in the food court. I was holding 2 lemonades, waiting for her to come out of the bathroom. He walked past me maybe 8 feet away, polo shirt, khakis. He was carrying a shopping bag from the bookstore. His hair was a little shorter, and he had put on some weight in his face, the healthy kind, the kind where somebody has been eating and sleeping. His arms were bare below the sleeves of the polo. There was nothing on them, no scars, no pink lines, nothing. He saw me before I could look away. He stopped for maybe half a second, just half. His eyes went to the lemonades in my hands and then back to my face, and I watched him figure out that I was not going to make a scene because I already knew I wasn't. I don't know how I knew, I just did. He shook his head, once, very small. The same way he had put his finger to his mouth in the ambulance bay 2 years earlier. Then he kept walking. He went past the pretzel place and out through the doors by the parking garage, and I never saw him again. My sister came back and asked me why I looked like that. I told her the lemonade was cold on my hand. We went and looked at the dress. She bought it. It was blue. I still have the run sheet in a folder in my kitchen. I don't know why I keep it. It's the only thing I own that says any of it happened. The call came in a little after 2 in the afternoon. Skier reported missing on the backside of the resort, out past the boundary rope, in a chute we had closed since New Year's. 2 witnesses saw him duck the rope. One of them filmed it on her phone, laughing, because that's what you do when you're 18 and you think closed means suggestion. I was in the patrol shack at the top of the lift, eating a cold burrito I'd brought from home. February in Utah, the sun already going soft on the ridgeline, and the wind had that dry scrape to it that you only get above 9,000 feet. Chris was on the radio. He said the guy's name, but I don't remember it now. Something ordinary. Something you'd hear called out in a coffee shop. We knew the chute. Everyone on patrol knew it. It slid 3 times a season on average, and it had already slid twice that winter. The second slide had come down 2 days before, on a Sunday, and the crown was still visible from the lift, a clean, bright line about 4 feet deep, where the slab had broken free. That's where our guy had gone in, not into the old debris. Into the fresh loaded pocket above it, the one nobody had touched since the wind loaded it overnight. By the time we booted up and got the sleds down to the drop-in, 40 minutes had already burned. That's the number that never leaves you, 40 minutes. You've got maybe a 15-minute window where the person under the snow is breathing something close to air. After 30, the pocket around their mouth turns to a hard rime shell from their own breath, and they suffocate quietly, not knowing it. After an hour, you're doing recovery. Everyone knows this. Nobody says it out loud on the way in. The snowmobile ride out to the boundary took 10 more minutes. I checked my beacon twice, once at the shack and once at the drop-in. You do that even when nothing feels off. My hands were shaking a little inside the gloves, not from cold, just from that pre-search adrenaline that never really settled no matter how many of these I ran. There were 6 of us in the field, 2 dogs from Alta, a handler named Ray who'd driven over the pass in the middle of her shift, and 3 of us on probes. The chute is wide at the top and pinches near the bottom into a narrow fan where debris always piles up. We started at the fan and worked upward, in a line, spaced a probe length apart, stepping in unison. You drop the pole, you feel for the difference. Soft, soft, hard but wrong, hard but right. Rock feels like rock, ice feels like ice. A body under 3 feet of snow feels like nothing else. And if you've ever felt it once, you don't forget. An hour in, the dogs hit on a spot near the pinch. Ray let them work it. They dug themselves into a hole about 2 feet deep, then lost interest and walked off. She said, calmly, sense pooling, winds carrying it down. She waved us upslope. We reset the line and kept probing. 2 hours. The sun was gone behind the ridge, and the light on the snow had turned that flat blue color, the one where you can't tell if a bump is a rock or a shadow. Someone on the radio asked about calling it for the night and starting fresh at first light, and Chris keyed his mic and said, no, not yet. We've got another hour of usable light, and the temp isn't dropping fast. I was working the 3rd row up from the fan, about halfway across, when I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. I hadn't felt anything through the probe yet. I lifted it, took 1 step to my left, planted it again, and pushed. First strike, right there. Something soft that gave and then didn't give. I called it. My voice came out flatter than I expected. Guys converged, shovels came off packs, and we started the V-cut down toward the pole. The snow that afternoon had that dense, sugary consistency you get after a wind event, and it shoveled like wet sand. 2 feet down, we hit fabric, a red shell jacket. He was on his side, 1 arm up near his face, the other pinned under him. His ski was still clipped to 1 boot. He was breathing. That's the first thing you check, and the only thing that matters for the first 10 seconds. Slow, shallow, but there. His eyes were half open and moving. When Ray leaned over him and said his name, he blinked at her and said, "Hi." Just that, hi, like she'd sat down next to him at a bar. We dug him out the rest of the way and checked him over. No obvious breaks, no blood. Mild hypothermia, core probably somewhere around 93, 94. He'd been under maybe 2 hours 40. That's a miracle number. That doesn't happen. When we asked him later, in the debrief, why he was alive, he said he'd found an air pocket near his face when the slide stopped, and he'd made himself stop panicking. He said something about counting his breaths. He said it in the way people talk when they've been very close to something and haven't finished thinking about it yet. We got him strapped onto the sked and started down the fan toward the sled. The runners kept catching on chunks of ice from the old debris, and we had to lift the front end and shuffle forward every few yards. 2 guys on the front, me and Chris on the back, Ray walking alongside with her hand on his shoulder, because that's what she does. She stays with them. He was looking up at the sky, which was that blue that comes right before real dark, and his lips were moving a little, and I thought he was just cold and mumbling. Then he said, clearly, "There was somebody talking to me down there." Nobody answered him. You don't answer that. You let them talk. The whole time, he said, from when the snow stopped, there was a voice right by my ear. It said, "Don't move." It said, "Don't move, don't try to dig, wait for them." It kept saying it. Whenever I started to shake, it said, "Stop, stay still, they're coming." Ray said, "Okay, buddy, okay, save your breath for me." He kept going. He said, "It sounded like a man, I don't know, older, calm." He turned his head, slow, and looked at me. His face was very white, and there was frost stuck in his eyebrows and along the edge of his hood. He said, "Did you hear him? When you were looking for me, did you hear him at all?" I said no. I said it flat and simple, the way you're supposed to. You don't feed the story. He'd been under snow in the dark for almost 3 hours with his own breath freezing on his face, and his brain had done what a brain does when it's out of oxygen and options. It had found him a companion. That's what I told myself on the way down, and it's what I would have told anyone who asked. The medics took him at the base. His girlfriend was there, the same one who'd filmed him ducking the rope, in a puffy pink jacket with her hands pushed into her sleeves. She looked younger than 18 from where I was standing. She wasn't making any sound. He was talking to the medic about the voice while they were loading him, and the medic was nodding the way medics do, patient and empty. In the report that night, Chris typed the standard line, "Hallucinations secondary to hypothermia." It's a real thing. It happens. People pull rocks out of the snow and swear they were talking to a dog. A woman on Mount Hood a few years back was convinced her dead father sat with her under a collapsed cornice for 6 hours. It's in the literature. It's not even rare. I signed the report and drove home and slept 11 hours. Here's the thing I didn't put in the report, and didn't say to Chris, and didn't say to Ray, because there wasn't anywhere for it to go. When I stepped to the left and planted my probe that second time, I already knew. I knew before the pole went in. I don't mean I had a feeling. I mean I knew the way you know which pocket your keys are in without checking. There was no reasoning behind it. Nothing I could point to on the slope. I took the step because I was going to find him there, and then I found him there. And the probe pushed into him the way a spoon pushes into something soft. And my hands did what they were supposed to do, while the rest of me stood very still on the surface of the snow. I've thought about it, in the way you think about something you're not going to solve. I've been on 11 live recoveries, and a lot more that weren't. I've probed for hours, and hit nothing. I've hit rocks so many times I've stopped counting. This was not that. Months later, I asked one of the older guys, Pete, whether he'd ever had that thing happen. He looked at me for a second and then said, "Once or twice, don't chase it." Then he changed the subject and asked me about my truck. I don't have a story about it. I don't have a theory. The guy asked me if I heard the voice and I said no, and that was true. I didn't hear anything. I just knew where to stand. The station kitchen has a whiteboard where you sign off your rations for the week, and by the middle of June, the numbers stopped matching what was left in the pantry, not by a lot, a jar of peanut butter down to the scrape when it should have been half full, a sleeve of crackers gone, 2 of the shrink-wrapped cheese blocks I'd counted on Sunday, missing by Wednesday. Small stuff. You only notice because there are 5 of you in a metal building the size of a school bus, and food is the one thing that breaks up the days. I mentioned it to Bram first, because Bram had been on the ice longer than any of us, and I trusted his read on things. He shrugged and said someone probably forgot to sign the board. That happens. It didn't feel like that, but I let it go. June was our first full month of polar night. No sun, not even the smudge of a horizon. The generators ran on a low, constant hum you stopped hearing after a week, and outside the wind sat at 40 below and did not move for days at a time. We had 4 months to go before the resupply plane could even think about landing. If something went sideways, we were on our own. The person who was wrong was Halden. I want to be careful about how I say that, because for a long time, I thought I was the one who was wrong. Halden was the glaciologist. Quiet guy, thin, mid-30s, had done a stint at a Norwegian station the previous winter, and came recommended by 2 of the senior researchers back home. On paper, he was the most experienced overwinterer on the crew. In person, he was easy company, didn't talk much, laughed at other people's jokes without needing to make his own. The first thing I actually noticed before the food was the mugs. Halden was up before us, every morning. Our schedules were staggered, so someone was awake for the atmospheric readings at 0500, and we rotated that draw week by week. But even when Halden wasn't on shift, his mug was already washed and upside down in the drying rack by the time I got to the kitchen at 7, coffee still warm in the pot. Sometimes there was steam on the inside of the window above the sink, which meant hot water had run recently. I asked him once, offhand, if he was sleeping okay. He said yes, said he liked the quiet in the early hours. Fair enough, some people do. Then Ines came into the common room one morning holding an empty foil pouch and looking at it like it had insulted her. It was one of the freeze-dried curries she'd been saving. Her name was on it in black marker. She said, "Did anyone eat this?" Nobody had. Or nobody said they had. Halden was reading at the table and didn't look up. Ines let it drop. That was the rule down here. Complaining early is a bad look. You've got a year ahead of you with 4 other people and no door to walk out of. So you learn to eat small things and keep going. I started paying attention after that. Halden went outside twice a week, always alone, always in the dead middle of the day, when the rest of us were either sleeping or deep in work. He signed the exterior log the way you're supposed to, wrote "Field Check, Sector 3, or Instrument Service in the notes column, and stepped out into the dark for anywhere between 40 minutes and 2 hours. When he came back in, he did the reverse airlock procedure exactly right, hung his suit up, and went to his bunk without saying anything. Nobody asked. Field work is field work. If it's on the schedule, it's on the schedule. Except it wasn't on the schedule. I'm the one who keeps the science calendar. I write out the sampling weeks and the instrument service rotations, and I know what Sector 3 needs and when. Because if I don't, the data goes to hell. Sector 3 didn't need anything Halden was pretending to do out there. Not on those days. Not that often. I didn't say anything yet. I wanted to be sure. The oxygen cylinders were what pushed me over. We don't breathe bottled air outside. Obviously, it's not the moon. But we use small emergency cylinders when we're doing longer excursions or working in the drill sheds where the ventilation is bad. Each cylinder has a serial number and a logbook entry every time it comes off the rack. Kellen managed that log because he was the safety officer for the season, and Kellen is the kind of person who audits himself twice. I asked him if I could look at the numbers, on the pretense of matching them to my science schedule. He said sure. I sat with the logbook in the equipment room for about 20 minutes. According to the log, 3 cylinders had been signed out that month, all by people other than Halden, all for jobs I could verify. According to the physical rack and the tally of empties in the return bin, 11 cylinders had been used, 8 cylinders unaccounted for, in 4 weeks. That's not a rounding error. That's someone taking equipment off the rack, using it, and putting it back without logging it. I did the math twice because I didn't believe it the first time. I went to Kellen. I didn't accuse anyone. I just showed him the count and asked if there was any chance the empties were miscategorized. He looked at it for a long time, tapped the page twice with his finger, and then said, very carefully, "Let's not open this yet. We just started." That was the sentence. That was the moment I understood we were all going to sit on this. Kellen wasn't stupid. Bram wasn't stupid. Inez wasn't stupid. They had all noticed things. The missing food, the mugs washed at strange hours. But we were 4 months into a 15-month rotation, in a building where you cannot walk more than 60 feet in any direction, and the person you are talking about sleeps 12 feet from your head. You do not start that conversation in June. Being wrong is bad. Being right and stuck with him for another 11 months is worse. So I started writing everything down. I kept it on my personal laptop in a document I renamed after a data file for one of my ongoing projects. Dates, times, quantities, direct quotes when I could remember them exactly. What Halden said when Inez asked about the curry pouch, which was nothing. What he said when Bram, a week later, asked him casually where he'd been walking. Halden said, "Just checking the fence line." There is no fence line. There is nothing to fence. I noted the day he came back in with frost inside his goggles, which meant he'd had them off his face at some point, at 40 below, outside. I noted the day I found one of my chocolate bars in the trash under his bunk, in a wrapper folded very neatly, as if he'd wanted to hide the noise of it. I noted the day he corrected himself mid-sentence at dinner and said, "When I was in Tromsø," and then, half a second later, or, wherever, and glanced around the table to see if anyone had caught it. I also wrote what I did not know. I did not know why. I still don't. I'm not going to guess here, because guessing is how you convince yourself of the wrong shape of a thing. By the last week of June, I had 22 pages. The program we work for has a coordination office back home, with a secure channel for medical and behavioral issues on winter crews. Everyone gets the address during pre-deployment, and everyone forgets it, because you don't think you'll need it. I looked it up in my paperwork, encrypted the document the way we'd been trained, and sent it up on the evening satellite window on the 28th. 2 days later, a response came back. One sentence. Situation noted. Await scheduled rotation. Rotation was 4 months out. I read the message twice, closed the terminal, and went to bed. There wasn't anything else to do. I don't know what I had expected them to say. There was no plane. There was no way to bring one in until the light came back. Whatever was going on with Halden was going to continue for 4 more months, and we were going to keep eating at the same table with him. Nothing dramatic happened after that. That's the part I want people to understand. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't break anything. He kept getting up before the rest of us, kept going out twice a week, kept eating food that wasn't his and saying he hadn't. The oxygen numbers kept drifting. Kellen quietly re-inventoried the rack every Sunday night and didn't tell Halden he was doing it. Bram started locking the door of the workshop when he wasn't in it, which he'd never done before. Inez stopped labeling her food and started keeping a few pouches in her personal bag under her bunk. None of us talked about any of it out loud. We just made ourselves smaller around him. The plane came in October. Standard rotation. Halden got on first, the way people do when they've been counted out of the next season. He shook my hand at the airlock and told me it had been a good winter. I said the same. He looked fine. He looked like someone who had spent a normal year on the ice. The coordination office met his flight. That much I know because Bram had a friend on the ground crew who saw 2 people in unmarked coats walk him off the tarmac and into a vehicle that wasn't for regular passengers. He was directed to a psychiatric evaluation. That word, evaluation, was the word used in the internal memo the 4 of us were eventually shown. We were not told the results. We asked. We asked more than once. The answer, in writing, was that the outcome of the assessment was not to be disclosed to station personnel. I finished my rotation the following February. I still have the 22 pages. I have not opened the file since I sent it.